Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
People sexually abused as children by Church of England clergy are criticising the close links between the company dealing with their compensation claims and the church. The insurer Ecclesiastical, which has advised the church to settle many compensation claims, has had a string of senior members of the clergy on the board of directors. Well, we can speak now to Martin Bashir, the BBC's religious affairs correspondent. Explain more about the background to this, Martin.
It's a miserable milestone this week in the history of child sexual abuse and the church. We're today talking about the Church of England. On Wednesday, the German church published a report into abuse of choir boys at the Regensburger Deutschsprache school. And next week, the Catholic Church's most senior official, Cardinal George Pell, will appear in a court proceeding in Melbourne. So, a tough week. This particular story concerns the way an individual was treated after he disclosed and it was verified that he had been the victim, the subject of abuse. And the case really concerns what happens when an individual who trusted the church, trusted the pastoral leaders of the church, ends up being abused and then makes a disclosure to the church. What actually happens? Well, the church has a pastoral responsibility to that individual, the ongoing care, if you like, of that individual. And in this case, the individual concerned, who you'll see in my piece in a moment, didn't want to break away from the church. At the same time, the church's insurer is involved in discussions of a legal nature, for example, about compensation. And it's the clash of those two forces that are brought out in this particular story.
OK, well, let's see your report right now.
I think, like many survivors and victims, I've struggled through life, I've limped through life. The wounds in me are not obvious, but I'm bipolar. I've had long-term mental health illness. I was a school failure.
Gilo reflects on a life disfigured by sexual abuse. It was here in this church in the City of London where a young Gilo was first abused in the 1970s. As an adult, he tried to tell senior members of the church on at least 20 occasions. The church finally acknowledged his experience 2 years ago. But instead of emphasising pastoral support, they instructed the church's insurer to negotiate compensation.
I think because of the relationship that the church has with the insurers, the pastoral response is so fused with the legal response, so it's really effectively led by insurers.
But the Church of England doesn't legally own the insurer, so it's perfectly fine, presumably, for an insurer to give advice.
I think when that insurer has got such significant presence of senior clerics on its board across the years, then you're into an area of moral responsibility.
Ecclesiastical Insurance Group is the firm that advised the church to settle Gilo's case. But it has historical links with the church, founded by bishops and with senior clergy on its board to this day. That, say abuse victims, creates a clear conflict of interest. Their view was supported by this man, Ian Elliott, an internationally respected expert in child safeguarding who produced a report on Gilo's case for the Church of England.
The advice that I identified in the report directly conflicted with those pastoral responsibilities, and I highlighted that.
So are you saying there's a tension between the way clergy may want to respond pastorally towards someone making these allegations and the approach that's advocated by the insurance company?
On this particular occasion, absolutely in saying that.
John Titchener is Group Compliance Director of Ecclesiastical Insurance Group. Can you understand why a victim of sexual abuse who might be in litigation with the Church of England would be concerned that a senior member of the church was sitting on the board of the insurance company?
Well, our job as an insurer is to handle claims in accordance with our regulatory duties and responsibilities.
I understand that,
That's
but I'm asking you if you understand the concern that victims of abuse might have when they hear that members of the Board of Ecclesiastical are also senior members of the Church of England.
Well, we have one member of the clergy on our board of 11, and non-executive directors do not involve themselves in the operational detail of how the business is run.
But the composition of Ecclesiastical's board is not the most damning aspect of the report. Ian Elliott says that when the church eventually acknowledged Gilo's suffering, it was quickly advised to stop talking to him.
Clearly unacceptable, and I said that. Clearly unacceptable. That's not, that direction or that advice is not compliant with a compassionate pastoral response, which is the stated policy of the church. It's not a secular organisation, it's a church. The church exists on foundational principles.
So you're saying the church's focus should be principally driven by its pastoral responsibilities.
Absolutely.
And not by its legal advice?
Absolutely. Without not just the Church of England, but any church.
John Titchener of Ecclesiastical Insurance. Why did Ecclesiastical Insurance advise the bishop handling this case to cut off all communications with the victim?
Well, you're quoting from the Elliott Review. We were not asked to participate in the Elliott Review, and had we been asked, we would have provided the information that we have.
The Bishop of Bath and Wells, Peter Hancock, is now the most senior clergyman responsible for safeguarding issues and strongly disagrees with the church's insurer. Would it surprise you to learn that Ecclesiastical Insurance Group rejects the findings of the Elliott Review?
I'd want to take an entirely different position to that. The Archbishop very clearly and in a very determined way accepted all those recommendations, and one of my roles as the lead bishop for safeguarding is to make sure that those recommendations are monitored and evaluated and, more importantly, acted upon.
Another place, another time, the same complaint. At Kendal House in Kent, a Church of England home for young girls, residents were found to have been drugged and assaulted. A settlement was reached with some victims by lawyers from the church's insurers Ecclesiastical. Teresa Cooper was one of the victims.
I think there needs to be an investigation into the Ecclesiastical Insurance Company and the Church of England and the way their solicitors are dealing with legal cases. They're too involved with the Church of England. There's, you know, even if they're not legally part of it, the church are without a doubt fully involved in the Ecclesiastical Insurance Company. Without a doubt. In my case, they certainly were.
Again, we put Teresa Cooper's allegations to John Titchener of Ecclesiastical Insurance.
In fact, there is an investigation into exactly that through the independent inquiry, which we're participating in. And in fact, we gave evidence last November where we spoke about how we handle sensitive claims of this nature. And we received plaudits at it for how we approach these claims.
You're not receiving plaudits from the individual survivors. They are accusing you of impeding the pastoral process. You are saying they are not telling the truth.
Well, no, as I say, the report is based on factual inaccuracies. And we have been absolutely clear before and after that pastoral care and counselling can and should continue in parallel with an insurance claim.
Gilo wants the church to learn from his appalling experience. He says it must change the relationship with its insurer, removing members of clergy from its board. But any such change will now come too late for him.
I've seen a side of the church that is ugly, that is silencing, that is self-preserving, that is reluctant to really embrace and engage with very key critical issues. I don't have much faith in the church, that's for sure.
Well, that's Gilo finishing the report by Martin Bashir. We'll speak again to Martin in a moment, but right now we can speak to the Bishop of Buckingham, the Right Reverend Alan Wilson. Thank you for joining us. Do you believe that legal advice can be in conflict, is in conflict with the pastoral role of the church?
Yes. I mean, I think it's a very odd relationship with anybody if it's conducted entirely through lawyers. I mean, imagine I had my relationship with my next door neighbour was conducted entirely through lawyers. It would become a very weird relationship very quickly indeed. I mean, my interest is I'm a pastor, that's what I was ordained to be, and my sense is that we need to begin with survivors and their experience, not just because we're being nice to survivors, but, if you read the parable of the Good Samaritan, you don't walk by with your nose in the air because you're off to the temple in Jerusalem. You stop and help the person who's bleeding in the road, and that should be our primary concern.
So when you hear Gilo say that he's seen a side of the church that is silencing and self-preserving, what do you think?
Well, I think that side of the church is there and we need to do something about it.
How large a part of the church do you think it is? I mean, because this is humans we're talking about, as you've described, who are there because they want to help, presumably other humans.
Well, I think that there's a kind of culture, and the latest Gibb report talks about the culture of deference in the church. I mean, imagine I had a complaint against my local police force in Thames Valley, and the only way I could complain would be to go personally to see the chief constable, who then controlled all of the information, all of the complaint, and handled it from then on in, without an independent safeguarding authority, with the right and the ability to do its job properly. I don't see how we're going to shift this mess.
It's been a long time coming, hasn't it? I mean, over the years there have been so many cases of people abused within the church who have not been treated as they should have been, and it has seemed that there's been a greater desire to protect members of the clergy than actually help those who have suffered.
Well, that's Gilo's experience, and he's not alone. And as a bishop, we need to take that very seriously and do something about it. And just hand-wringing and hoping that you can generate a load of apologies and somehow that will be a substitute for doing anything about it, it really isn't. If you're sorry for something, you need to do something about it, not just tell everybody how sorry you are and hope that somehow they'll go away.
Do you have faith something will change?
Well, I think there are lots of signs that are positive. I mean, certainly the music that's coming out of the church now is that it wants to take safeguarding much more seriously than was the case in the past. But there's also a message that, that was then and this is now. I don't think that's true. I think a lot of the attitudes and culture and problems that Gilo experienced are still things that happen in church, and I think we need to do something about them. I think
when you say are still things that happen in church, I mean, do you think as in terms of historical cases of abuse being treated this way, or
Yes.
these things are still happening?
Well, I think both. I think the culture is still very active, the culture of deference, the culture of protecting the institution, the world of ecclesiastical lawyers. It's a very small world, and the first thing bishops do when somebody alleges something is phone up the registrar, who's a lawyer, and ask him what to do. Now, all of these things distort the process, as does the involvement of the insurance business, which, obviously is a thing that Gilo is particularly energised about. But there's a big culture there. I think we need to have an independent safeguarding authority. It needs to have the ability to do its job properly. We also need, and this is church policy actually, statutory reporting so that it becomes an offence not to report. Because another aspect of this is the way that people don't say. I mean, I had a case of domestic abuse in a vicarage a few years ago where the church warden knew what was going on but didn't report anything until the person had moved. Now we've got to tackle that problem and get people to report when they know there's something anomalous going on so that something can be done about it. So it's a big cultural problem, but I think the next step has to be to have a truly independent safeguarding authority with the competence and the authority to tackle this problem head on.
Martin, two very clear suggestions there, an independent safeguarding authority and statutory reporting. Are they things that are likely to happen?
Well, the Church of England, interestingly enough, Joanna, has issued a statement this morning saying, and I'll quote, "The Church of England is absolutely committed to its pastoral response to alleged victims and survivors, and published new guidance in 2015 and emphasised that the management process needs to be kept separate from legal and insurance responses." The statement goes on to say the pastoral needs of survivors must never be neglected. I think it has to be conceded that the Church of England has changed the way it manages these incidents of disclosure. There is now a bishop who is the head of safeguarding, the Bishop of Bath and Wells, Peter Hancock. So Every diocese has a designated leader. Every member of the clergy is trained in safeguarding issues. So there has been a revolutionary change. The issue, though, that Bishop Allen mentions is the question that many people have, which is, should the process of managing safeguarding be done by the church itself? Bishop Allen says no, so does Gilo. A question that was put to me by somebody recently was this: if a member of Kensington and Chelsea Council was found also to be a non-executive director on a cladding company, would people feel that that was a conflict of interest? And that's a very stark and dramatic parallel. And I think the answer is people would object to that.
Martin Bashir, Bishop Allen, thank you both very much.